But then beyond that, on the top right, I want to point out, if you go back to that workshop and events and you tap that upcoming workshop and events tab, just like you did to register previously, and you scroll down to the bottom, we not only have recordings of a few of our workshops available, but we also have our materials section. So normally in person, you get this amazing handbook to take home with you, and you have all these cool exercises. So that is available for you to download. You can feel free to do that. And if you can see your chat box in your GoToWebinar panel right now, there is also a link there for you as well. And I can also put that in the question box for y'all as well. And then how to use that chat box or question box is right here. So here's your GoToWebinar control panel. And you see the little triangles on the left of those words, or how you kind of open and close those different menus. And when you do that, there's going to be a couple of different things. Audio, if you can't hear me, we'll get to that in a second. You'll be able to read that, but we're not going to be using the hand raise feature. So we don't have you, we have all of you muted so that we can protect your privacy. So that means we can't see you, we can't hear you. And when you ask a question and we reply all to the rest of the audience, they won't see who asked that question either. So please, please, please ask questions. Ask as many as you want. We miss your faces, and that's how we're going to engage with you. And we'll get to as many as we can, with the caveat that, time sometimes becomes limited because we have so many good questions. And then the last thing that's really important here is this section right here about audio. I just like to pause here for a minute so people can access if they need to, because obviously they wouldn't be able to hear me right now. And so with that said, that is also in your chat box, and I can try to put it into the question box for you as well. And I will also place my email in the chat box as well, so you have access to us in the future to answer other kinds of questions and things like that. And now I will hand it over to one of our partners in the community who normally hosts these amazing workshops, so is now virtually helping us host them too. Judy, I will make you the presenter. And I know I went through that very fast, so if you have questions, please use the question box for that as well. Judy?
All righty. I'm with Bridgeport United Church of Christ. We're an open and affirming, just peace and immigrant welcoming congregation. And a few years ago, we partnered with DPave to transform our parking lot, and something's coming up on my screen, to deal with our collapsing storm sewer situation. And DPave got involved with that, and we actually just planted a rain garden right around it. So I have some slides to share if I can find them. Let's see now. Are you going to do a share screen?
I gave you permissions. You're just going to have to hit that button by your mic in your camera to share.
Okay. Oh no, that's the screenshot. Oops.
Yeah, I'll do this.
Okay, here we go. All right, do you see him now?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, well, I've got him up on my.
I think you need to hit the show screen in the sharing section. So you.
Okay, sharing. Show.
Yes, perfect. Good job.
But now, okay, now I've got to. Would like to capture the screen. Can I just do that? Are you seeing it now?
Not yet.
No.
I get this little box coming up saying would like to capture this computer screen grant application. Oh, it's in the system preferences. Okay. Let me
Okay. Our apologies.
I have to. I guess it's my privacy settings. Need to be unlocked.
Well, maybe you can just talk about it.
And if you send me an email with it, I can pass it on to all of the participants as well.
Okay. Oh, good grief. Um, so what we did was we worked with D-Pave. They came and took up asphalt out of our parking lot down the center of it and came around the storm sewer. And we took out all the asphalt, we put in soil, we planted native plants, and we fashioned it around the storm drain, and they had little breakouts with a new curb so that all right, I'm going to try this again. Still no pictures?
No.
Huh. Okay. So, well, shoot, I was hoping that you'd have these pictures. Okay, so we actually have two rain gardens. One is in the center of our parking lot around the storm drain. And then another one on the northwest corner of our building, which we were able to tie in our downspout to capture some of the rainwater off of the roof of the church. And we actually got a, from the Clean Rivers thing, we got money off of our bill every month because of the capturing of some of the rainwater. So that was really cool. When we have a little berm around that area and all native plants. So so we did lots of other things along with our rain gardens, but I know this is the focus of this. So I'll put the address in the chat. If you want to go by and look at it yourself, you're free to go look at our rain gardens. We also did naturescaping along the perimeter. We also have a little living roof there, eco roof on one of our little porch roofs, and permeable pavers on the east side of the building. So anyway, I will send these slides off to Brandy, and hopefully she can share them with you at another time.
Yeah, I can attest it's really a nice demonstration site. You've done a lot of work over the years, and it's in the Montevilla neighborhood, just to let you all know where it is, and it's a easy site to come and check out what they've done.
Yes, all right. I'm done then.
Okay, so shall I just start? Is that
Well,
Randy?
We have Amy, Amy, would you like to have Laura introduce herself before you get started, and I'll make you presenter?
Yeah.
I'll just be very brief. My name's Laura Price. I am a landscape architect, and my business is Design with Nature. I had a long career working mostly in parks and natural areas, so a lot of native restoration type work, and then of late taking all of that and bringing it down to the small residential scale. And I love working with folks that want to shift the paradigm to making their yards more ecologically diverse and sustainable. And stormwater in the Northwest is a important thing to manage, to get back into the ground to help us get through our summers. So that's subject today, and I'll hand it over to Amy.
Great. Thank you, Laura. My name is Amy Whitworth. I am a landscape designer here in Portland. Just my business is Planet Earth Design, and I've been helping homeowners craft earth-friendly gardens for over 20 years. And most of my projects, I always look for opportunities to create rain gardens on the projects. Sorry about that. And look forward to sharing some pro tips as we go along here today to share some of the experiences that I've had doing installations of rain gardens and helping you try to figure out how to fit one in your property as well. So just to look at our agenda for the day, first we're going to talk about stormwater issues and why it's important to think about stormwater on our properties and how that affects the greater region wherever we live. Then Laura is going to talk about site assessment and design and do a hands-on calculation exercise. Well, it'll be hands-on for her, but you won't be doing hands-on. But you can download the booklet and do the exercise at home on your own. And we'll take a little break, and then I'll come back and talk about rain garden construction. Laura will talk about plant selection, and then challenging sites. So, oops. So let's start by talking about describing what exactly we mean when we talk about a rain garden. It's kind of the opposite of what you think about a regular landscape bed that's usually mounded up a little bit. And a rain garden is a sunken garden bed, kind of a sunken depression in the garden, a little swale, if you will, that you will take your downspouts and connect it to the rain garden so it collects the water from the roof. Could be a driveway or sidewalk or parking lot, but in the case of what we're going to be talking about today, we're pretty much talking about the roof water because it's a known quantity and we know how much is going to be coming off the roof. So it's a little garden that's going to collect the water from a surface and then slow that water down, hold it, and let it soak into the ground. This is a cross section of what that might look like. So we have on the left-hand side, the roof water coming in, starting to fill up that sunken swale and fills up to a point. The water starts to soak into the ground and then also is taken up by the plants and released up into the air through transpiration. And then finally, with a big enough rain event, the rain garden is designed to overflow to the surrounding area or to an area that you designate as the overflow area. So that's important to note, is that they are designed to overflow. And so thinking about where that excess water is going to go, as in not towards the house, is a good idea. And this is an example of a very simple rain garden. This is a garden that I designed for a homeowner in Northeast Portland many years ago. The downspout is off the corner of the house over here, and there's a long pipe that lays on the surface of the ground, and you can't see it, but there's a little inlet right here, and it's not extraordinarily sunken. It's just a little depression. There's some rushes and other plants inside there. So it doesn't have to, it can stand out as much or as little as you'd like it to, but it just adds a little contour to your property. Another example of a rain garden in Gresham, and you can see the two downspouts at the corner of the house. They are coming through a pipe underground, and there's a little inlet with a little rock protection. And this whole thing is the rain garden. In a more of a commercial application, you might have seen some of these rain gardens. This is an example at New Seasons parking lot in Southeast Portland. But we're seeing lots of green streets popping up all over that are the little depressions off the side of the road with a curb cut. And this is what Judy was talking about, similar to what was happening with the DPAVE project. The water runs in through these openings in the curb, and fills up these sunken depressions. And you can see that some plants are growing right in the water, coming up through the water. Even trees can grow in rain gardens. And along the sides that are sloping, plants that sometimes get full of water, and their roots are deeper into the water. So there's different levels of the rain garden as well. A lot of people ask the question whether rain gardens breed mosquitoes. And the answer is no, they do not, because the rain gardens are designed to drain in about a day. So mosquitoes require 72 hours before they lay their eggs and their eggs hatch. So with a properly functioning rain garden, they would not breed mosquitoes. And that brings us to the difference between a rain garden and some other areas that might breed mosquitoes, like this. So this is a pretty large area. This is a wetland for sure. You can see that the plants, the trees and shrubs are underwater here. The roots are underwater. And then there's areas that are dry around the edges. But this is a wetland, very large scale, does not drain in a day, although it might drain later in the season. But this is not a rain garden. This is a wetland. That's a distinction. And this too, this is not a rain garden. This is a pond, a garden pond. So ponds are designed to keep their water through the summer with water plants like lilies and irises that are living in water all summer long. A rain garden is all about infiltration and soaking the water into the ground. These have a liner, an impermeable liner, so that keeps the water from soaking into the ground, and rain gardens need to soak their water into the ground. So this is not a rain garden, it's a water garden. As I said, rain gardens are designed to dry out in about a day, and you can see in the top photograph a rain garden inactive rain event, and then at the bottom the rain garden once it has subsided. And now let's look at some reasons why rain gardens are important and how they help the greater ecosystem. So we'll first take a look at the hydrologic cycle, which maybe we have run into in grade school, but let's take another fresh look at it. And this is kind of what our Pacific Northwest habitat looks like, or looked like before pre-development times. So we basically are coniferous forest with evergreens and deciduous plants on unforested slopes. So in those kinds of conditions, when the rain comes down from the sky, a lot of the water gets held up in the needles of the tree and doesn't even make it to the surface of the ground. And then of what does, we have that nice forest duff underneath the trees. So a lot of the water that makes it to the ground gets soaked up in that sponge, that forest duff sponge, and slowly soaks into the ground with very little runoff, less than 1% surface runoff that goes down the hill and finally makes it into the local stream or river or lake. So most of that water is soaking into the ground, recharging the water table and making healthy water for the streams. And then the plants themselves drink up a lot of that water that's been stored in the ground and then release it into the air through evapotranspiration. That's the way that plants and water work in a system. Now, humans come along and do our thing, which is building things. We're pretty good at that. Clearing land and building things and creating a lot of hard surfaces that do not allow the rainwater to soak into the ground. Parking lots, roadways, sidewalks, houses, all of these are known as impervious surfaces where the water can't soak in. And we have designed our houses to very efficiently collect the water from our roofs and move it quickly to the gutters, to the downspouts, and off the site. So if your downspouts are connected, if your downspouts are disconnected, the water might just flow onto your driveway, as in this example, and out to the street, and then to a local storm drain. So it's not really being treated at all, and it's collecting pollutants along its path. Or it might go to a local waterway, a stream, a creek, or directly to the wastewater treatment plant. So for those of you that live on the west side and sloped areas, your water might go to a local stream. And I'd like to just do a little poll with you guys for a second here. And as we get started, just to find out what you know about rain gardens to start with. And hopefully you see that. And so, yeah, let me know whether you're a beginner, you need a little something, know something about it, or you've already started building one. That would be great to know as we move forward, what your knowledge level is. Looks like we have no beginners.
One newbie.
One new beginner, okay.
But yeah,
Yeah,
and
we're gonna.
everybody falls mostly in the category of familiar, which is good, but wanting guidance. So that's great.
Mhm. Yeah, let me just take a look at that for a second. Okay, good. So that's where we're at. All right. So back to our presentation here. All right, so after development in our current conditions, one thing that we notice right away is there's a lot less trees and a lot harder surfaces in developed areas, neighborhoods where there once was forest, and now there's 150 houses. All of that water now, most of it, what used to be less than 1% runoff, is now 20 to 30% surface runoff. We still are getting the same amount of precipitation, but it's not soaking into the ground. We have very limited areas of plants and soil for the water to soak into, but a lot of hard surfaces for that water to run off. So very little, it gets a chance to soak into the ground to recharge the groundwater, and a lot, 20 to 30% of the runoff is going directly into the streams. And there's also less evapotranspiration by the plants themselves because we have less of a forested area. So you can see that kind of starts to set up a little bit of an issue with surface water and pollution and soil erosion that as the water just kind of flows off of our hard surfaces, and even things like lawns where the water will just kind of sheet off of it. And all of that excess water leads to degradation of the soil and the stream banks in the low spots in our neighborhoods, wherever water collects and starts to form a stream, or where small streams are existing. We get things like in the top left corner where there's not really enough roots of plants to hold the soil together on the banks. So it just kind of erodes. And then on the bottom right corner, these rushing waters just really scour out the interiors of these stream banks. So they make them steep and deep, and whatever plants are there end up falling over, and a lot of erosion happens here. So these are not good things. Of course, the other thing that happens in big storm events is flooding issues. And that is not only inconvenient, but it can be downright dangerous. Of course, we won't get great white sharks in on our streets, but it can be a dangerous, very dangerous situation, as we've seen as storms get stronger and stronger, and weather events become increase in frequency as well as intensity. We'll get more and more flooding events if we haven't dealt with our stormwater in another way. And the other thing to consider is that a lot of, as this water runs over the surfaces of these of our streets and other hardscape surfaces, they are collecting all kinds of pollutants, including excess fertilizers from our lawns and gardens, solid waste from pets and animals if waste hasn't been picked up. Also pesticides that have been used, and things like washing your car and those chemicals that are left on the surface. I want to draw your attention also to copper, which is and other heavy metals. These elements that are asterisked are of particular danger to baby salmon when they hatch, and when these elements end up in our water, they affect the salmon that might be in the stream making their way to the ocean. And studies have found that some of these chemicals and elements will just immediately, just within a very short period of time, will start to kill these baby salmon. So especially the asterisk elements. And so think about copper as a material, because it happens to also be a decorative, you'll find a lot of decorative rain chains made out of copper and decorative downspouts made out of copper, and it might not be the best material for carrying your water to other areas. Now I think I'm going to hand it over to Laura to talk about an alternative approach to the engineered approach. And let's see here. Pardon my Laura, moving over to you. Yes. Okay, do you see that, Laura? Yeah.
Okay, I think everyone can see my screen, is that right?
I think so.
Okay. Well, this section is focusing on how you go about looking at your site specifically to see if it's appropriate to construct a rain garden, because not every site is. Some folks come to our class and make that determination, which is also useful. And we will talk about other ways to address stormwater, and if you other than or in addition to a rain garden. So, and just to reiterate, you do have a booklet, an exercise booklet that helps you sort of work through this assessment and calculation exercise. So let's get started here. So what we're going to talk about, these are the main things that you need to consider, is the slope of your land. It gets complicated if you've got too much slope, and so we have a sort of rule of thumb about that. You want to make sure that the soils drain sufficiently, because these rain gardens are meant to get the water down into the groundwater and not sit there holding water. And there's a lot of parameters about where to best place the rain garden. And then you want to size it according to how much water or impervious surface that's collecting the water is how we calculate, measuring that is how we calculate how big that rain garden needs to be. So before we go through all of that, just want you to know that you don't need permits to do this work, but we certainly have guidelines for you. And, you know, we can't speak for every jurisdiction, but, you know, Portland is really promoting these in areas that are suitable. And I assume other jurisdictions are pretty friendly to this as well. You can check. So the trouble with slope, you know, all water will go downhill, and in certain areas like the West Hills, soils can get waterlogged, and when they do, that's where the potential of slide happens, and there's always someone downhill from you. So that's a rather extreme caution about slopes, but you know, we did have this happen a while back. In the West Hills, where basically a whole house and property is gone and it's on top of another property further down the hill. I think the story of this is they probably had an automated irrigation system and a leak in their main line, and it totally saturated the soils in their yard. And on the West Hills, you have a situation where, you know, it's the bedrock is basalt. You can kind of see the cut and fill of how these homes are set on the hillside. And what happens here is water comes down through the soil and hits the rock. And so you almost have a flow area of when you have heavy rains along this line here, and that's where the slides happen. So that's major erosion, but even on a smaller and simpler scale, if you have slopes on your property, if they're not covered with vegetation or a good mulch cover, et cetera, they are prone to erode too. And in town, I can see this situation where you just have dirt sloughing at the bottom of the slope and over the sidewalks, for instance. This is a fun little map. You can see where all the landslides have happened. And of course, we see all the West Hills, but I also see Alameda Ridge and Beaver Creek out in Troutdale, some areas down along the Clackamas. So we've had mini slide areas. So what we recommend is that that you seek an area of your yard that is no greater than 10% to place a rain garden. And 10% isn't very much visually. And if you have if your home is situated where you're looking over a steep slope down, or you know, we want to make sure that you have sufficient setback from the slope area. And you know, you may have a site that you really want to seek some professional guidance beforehand. But we have a really simple rule of thumb about the 10% rule. So I know there's a lot of words here on this diagram, but it's pretty simple in concept. It's simple geometry, but maybe geometry is intimidating for some. But let's walk through it. So here you see this example. Here's a house with the downspout. Looks like they've got a sufficient setback distance from the house, which we'll talk about. And so in this case, to measure this slope, to make sure it's under 10%, there's a stake at the upper end. See that, and a stake at the bottom end. I'll assume in this case, they've already sort of measured the impervious of the roof up here to figure out how big that rain garden needs to be. So here's a stake at the bottom, and they've tied a string really tight between the two stakes. And there's a little gadget you can get at any hardware store. It's called a line level. It hangs on the string. And so you can tell when that's level. So essentially, once you get that set like that, just measure this vertical distance and this horizontal distance. And you're going to divide this 18 inches by the horizontal distance. And you can note they've put it all in inches to inches, so we can do the math. In reality, it's probably about, I think it's 9 feet something. And what we get is like a 0.07, or you take that times 100 and that gives you 7.7%. So this is right in the ballpark of, it's under 10%. It's a fine grade to build a rain garden on. So the next thing we talked about was, do you have sufficient permeability of your soil? So, that gets into sort of, there's a soil texture. All of our soils are categorized as, by this texture, which basically refers to the amount of clay, sand, or silt that makes up your soil. And in our urban areas, we have a lot of, the soil can be much more variable, like for instance, if fill was brought in, or so you don't really know what you have, but this is just kind of a field test, and we all generally know this from our little kid sensibilities, that you have a lot of clay in your soil. It has, it's fine particles, so fine that they suspend in water, and that's how you see, why you see that kind of chocolatey water when we have our big storms. You can see that in the rivers. So like clay, you can shape it. You can roll it in a ball or a pancake, or shape it like a snake, and that's a lot of clay content. Conversely, if it's a lot of sand content, it's going to be gritty and more friable and break apart. And silt just refers to particles in between those two. And also, if you're all gardeners, you certainly know what happens with clay and the how slick and slimy it can get in the winter. And then in some of our dry summers, it shrinks so much that you see cracks in the ground. And there's ways, by the way, compost blended in with the soil, whether they're sandy or clay, really helps them, improves the soil for growing conditions. And we talk about that in our naturescaping class. So so you can do a percolation test, and this is what it means. You dig a hole about 12 inches deep, and then you're going to come along and fill it with water and let that drain. And the reason we're doing that is, rain gardens are really doing their work in the wintertime when the soils are already wet, and you want to make sure that you have sufficient drainage in the winter. So, we want those soils to be not, especially if you're doing the test in the summer, you want to make sure that you have some general wetness in the soils before you do your test. So then after you've let it drain, fill it up again. And this time you have a marker, either just a stake with a line marking where the water level is, or in this case, they've used a tape measure. So you can measure where that water level is, note it, and then go away for an hour to let it drain, and come back and see how much that water depth has dropped. And essentially, what you'll find is if it's dropped a ½ inch, that's actually adequate, sufficient to build a rain garden. Because remember, as Amy said, a rain garden is designed to drain within a day. So if your rain garden is only 12 inches and you have, 24 hours in a day, if it's draining at a ½ inch an hour, that's sufficient. You may have excellent drainage, over 2 inches, or 2 inches or more, and it's of course going to drain a lot quicker. We've built some gardens where it doesn't even seem to hold the water. It's really a place to send it down, and it drains, as it's raining, which is fine as well. But sometimes we like to see the standing water for a little bit. So there's a lot of guidelines for placement, just to avoid any unintended consequences. So the main one is, the most important one I would say is how far you place the rain garden from your foundation, particularly if you have a basement. So these are all pretty conservative, and I'll tell you the thinking behind them so one can use discretion, because sometimes we have pretty tight spaces and we have to decide, is this really a threat or not? So we say 10 feet from the foundation of a house that has a basement. Now that being said, if you're placing the rain garden in a spot that's already downslope from the house, where if it overflowed, it would be overflowing away from the house, you know, that distance could be, we used to say 6 feet, could be a little closer if it needed to be. Whereas, you know, if it were the opposite, like every home does have kind of a lay of the land, so to speak, and there's probably a high corner of your property and a low corner of your property. So in my last house, for instance, the backyard was, even though by, you know, casual eye looked flat, that was the higher end of the yard. So that means that the drainage is toward the house, and I would want to be a really, what shall I say, really take this 10-foot from the foundation rule to heart in that case.
Can I add something there, Laura?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, like with my old house, you know, I have a pretty old house and the foundation itself is not that, it's kind of porous. And so so there are some houses, particularly old houses, that might have a foundation that you find that there's a lot of moisture in the basement, or kind of little cracks that kind of, you have any kind of a problem. You want to keep it farther. And on the other side, with a newer house where there's a lot of foundation drains, a foundation drain has been built around the house. It's already taking all that surrounding water, any excess water, away from the house. So you can probably get a little bit closer with those type of situations, and you want to stay a little farther with the older porous foundation.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing you'll note as we go through examples, you know, that it's from the foundation. So for instance, if you have a house with a porch in front, you know, the porch is not over a basement. And so that 10-foot rule doesn't really apply there. You're really just looking at from the foundation.
Right.
Amy. So just to be a good neighbor, we recommend 5 feet from the property line if you can afford that. And again, the grades sort of dictate everything. It's like, well, if the property next to you is higher, there's not a risk of any overflow from the rain garden flowing onto their property. As I say, these are general guidelines, but there's lots of, you know, devil in the details or particulars that can help you kind of discern where it's important and where it's not. We also say 3 feet setback from sidewalks and driveways, and it's, you know, I think that's just a good rule in terms of circulation and space. And then we also say 10 feet from retaining walls, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail because in the next slides, because not all retaining walls are the same in terms of how tall they are or what they're built out of. So, but the general rule, this manage rain down slope from structures, that's always your best location, because, you know, it's just obvious that, you know, if it's all of these guidelines are for in the event if the rain garden should overflow, which really most of the time we're designing so that it shouldn't, but you want to always have that provision. Should you have a huge rain event or sustained rain events, it's like if that rain garden need to overflow, it was safe where that water was flowing to. So putting these constraints in an example here, you can see, especially with our little lots in inner Portland, you know, that it kind of quickly tells you, okay, here's where my rain garden needs to be. You know, we have the 3 feet off this driveway and sidewalk here, and a setback. It looks like in this case, they probably did more because there's a porch there, you know, further from the house than they needed to. There might be more discretion as to where you can put it, but you get the idea. So here's this photo of with a retaining wall. And does anybody like, what's wrong with this picture? It's like, this is exactly what, in terms of being a good neighbor, you shouldn't be doing. And you can see here, they have quite a lot of room to take that downspout and create a nice rain garden in the front. So we see the 5-foot setback from the side property line, which also looks like it happens to be maybe a little retaining wall there. But in this case, the retaining wall in the front, looks like it's only about 18 inches, and it's also porous. So the 10-foot rule is honestly, I think maybe a little bit of an overkill. I think 5 feet would be sufficient in this case. But you know, the good news in this site is like there's a lot of choice there as to where you want to put the rain garden, and most important is to have the setback from the house foundation, as I said before. So this 10-foot rule, where you really want to hold it back from retaining wall, is if that retaining wall is tall, like 4 feet or more, and if it's more solid, you know, with just a few little weep holes. Well, what happens in those situations is, especially if you have clay soil, you know, through the winter, all that rain is kind of being held in the clay soil, and it has a, you know, and it swells up. And if you had one of those taller or more solid retaining walls, you get a hydrostatic pressure where that it's sort of almost pushing the wall out toward over the sidewalk. And I've seen this in kind of in the older homes and walls around town where you see them outward leaning walls. So that's what we're trying to prevent happening when we locate it near a retaining wall. So just summarize, or a few other general rules. Of course, don't direct your overflow to the neighboring property. And also, because you will be digging, even though it's not that deep, you know, be aware of where your utility lines are. And there's, you know, the utility locate service is 811, and it's free, and they come out within a couple days, so you can know where those are. Also, just as a general rule, you know, you don't want to be cutting into roots that much. So we try to stay outside the canopy of trees when locating a spot for a rain garden. You know, that being said, again, details, it's like, you know, a red maple tree or others that they really appreciate the water would do better than, say, an oak, where you really don't want to disturb anything under the tree canopy that much. They're sensitive to grades and changes in water. So, you know, fine if there's some finer roots that are cut, you know, in the excavating for a rain garden, that's okay. And I also look, it's like, wow, these urban trees, if they already have sidewalk on one side and pavement on this other side with a driveway, you don't want to, you know, then I am much more concerned about not cutting into their root area, you know, any more than necessary. So this probably doesn't apply to most people, but if you have a septic drain field, you want to avoid that area because it's being designed to already handle a certain amount of water or effluent coming to it. And you don't want to put it, if you've had a decommissioned oil tank area, you wouldn't want to be necessarily building your rain garden there, but they tend to be close to the house anyway. So we've had some participants that, you know, they have a wet area and they think that would be, you know, the natural spot to do a rain garden, but it's not. And I think you know why. It goes back to the original premise. We want an area where that soil will drain, freely into the ground. In a wet spot it's not happening. So there's other things we can do in those wet spots, which we'll talk about. Some of you may have property where there's a high water table, less than 3 feet. So you probably wouldn't get the drainage you wanted in that situation. So we're going to kind of walk through with these aerial photos how you would kind of assess your property from the things that we've learned here. And I think this is all in, well, you'll see it all in your rain garden booklet and the exercise booklet that is available to you as some of the materials that you get with this class. So this is on Google Earth. You actually have a measuring tool. It's a pretty simple roof lines. So, but you could just walk outside and measure this distance on the ground and this distance to the center where the ridge line or peak of the roof is. So this is one plane of the roof. And that's really what you're paying attention to. I know when we've gone through this exercise in class, some students have sort of added up all of the square foot area to determine the rain garden, but water doesn't flow that way. So let's take the time to walk through here. So you can see with each plane, water is flowing a particular way. You can see that on these 3 roofs. And then of course, the next thing is, where are the downspouts? And so in this case, this is one roof plane, but there's 2 downspouts. So what that means is happening is that this gutter is hung, so there's probably a little high point in the center. So when water flows down the roof, there's everything on this half is flowing to this downspout, and everything on the bottom half is flowing to this downspout. So when you're measuring how much area is draining into this downspout, you're really doing this much, half the roof, in terms of how many square feet is that. Okay, hopefully this is all very obvious and clear, I hope. Okay, then there's also the setbacks that we mentioned. So we put in the setback from the house, and we'll assume this is the 10 feet. Setback from the garage, that might be a little closer, only 2 feet. 5-foot setbacks on the property lines. And then, of course, we also have trees that we're trying to stay away from. So in looking at this, there's some obvious places to put your rain garden. And, it looks like we have an opportunity here, once you get away from the house, in between these 2 plants or trees. An opportunity here. This could get, in this case, we've got 3 downspouts that could be coming into one rain garden, or maybe you do decide to have 2 separate smaller. These are all choices you make, which of course get made because you're not just designing your yard for rain gardens, you're designing your yard to use and live in, enjoy. So there's going to be other considerations that you add to this as to where you want to put it. So here we see, they put a couple rain gardens in the backyard, which still kind of saves this center space here. And here's just another scenario where they've decided to combine them all into one rain garden. So this is kind of important. You don't just dig a hole, and you really want to size it to properly receive the volume of water that's flowing into it. You don't, why make it way bigger than it needs to be, but you certainly don't want to make it too small. So to calculate the impervious surface on the property, let's go through this exercise. And this is basically following the exercise packet that you have access to. So this is just an example yard. It's probably a simpler one than I would guess a lot of you have. Like not a lot of constraints, you know, in terms of trees, and it looks like there's ample space. But let's just summarize what we have going on here. You can see there's a high point on this property and a low point, and these are contour lines. So in general, the water rainfall is if it drains, it's draining in, the direction of this arrow here, like that. But note, it's only 2%. So just for example, our sidewalks have a cross pitch of 2%. You almost need that much on surfaces just to have water flow off. So to the casual eye, this yard is really gonna look pretty flat, but it's still important to note that you do have that bit of flow or a bit of slope. So like we did before, you can see, you know, which way is the water flowing from these impervious surfaces. You see how they, again, the heavy lines are the peaks or ridges of the roof. So, and you can kind of see what's flowing to each downspout. So where does it shift? In this case, you know, is like, does this have a lot of water or little water coming out there? You know, just in general, it looks like this is going to be our largest area of roof that's feet coming out of this downspout. And look, we don't have a lot of area off of that. So, you know, this is where the measuring and calculating beforehand is kind of critical. You know, this is a garage, that's simple. And we do have water going down the driveway. You know, not everybody has an opportunity on their site to collect the runoff from the driveway, but you can. I mean, if there's a positive flow and there's ways with little trench drains, you can send that water into the yard to absorb, as opposed to just flowing into the street. So in this case, I just want to note, you can see that all of this is on a grid paper. So each little square is equal to 1 foot. So these heavier lines are 10 foot square. So to do our measurement, that's going to help us calculate the square footage. So notice where these breaks are. So this was a ridge line here and a ridge line there. So what you've done is divide the roof into the planes that you can see how much area is flowing into each downspout. So yeah, we have smaller areas and larger areas going on here. And we want to measure what that square foot is. So in this example, remember we said 10 feet for each of these. So this is like 30 feet long, and I believe 10 plus 2, 12. So let's look. Yeah. So for instance, that one section of the roof is 360 square feet. And remember, we had a rule of thumb that 10% of that square foot area is how big you want to make your rain garden. The caveat on that is that's given the assumption that you have ample drainage, that you use that 10% rule. If it's just so, you know, then we want to up that 10%, and we'll talk about that in a bit too. So, you know, 36 square feet for, did I go backwards? I did. For that 1 square. And then you just go around with each of those areas and figure out the square foot. So that's really that square foot area, just to be, reiterate, that's the number you're going to use to figure out the 10%, and that will tell you the size of your rain garden. So with that, you're going to assess now where you'll put how big you can make those rain gardens. And we just have a couple solutions to share with you. And this you would be working out yourself if we were all in a room together. But so here's one solution, and it's assuming that it does have a basement. So there is all of these rain gardens are set well away from the house. And you can see in this case, since this is kind of uphill, they've opted to connect this downspout with a underground pipe to this one, and then on into a rain garden in the front. So if you added up both those 176 from 360, that gives you 536 square feet, or 10% of that, 53.6 square feet. You know, and we don't really make our rain gardens square and rectangular. It's going to be more of a natural shape, but at least you know how you can kind of use this to get that. We'll tell you how you can do that more naturally, actually. So this rain garden is just receiving from this one downspout, which you can see is 180. So it's a smaller one. This actually has to be the largest one at it's receiving from one half of the roof plus this whole area. And yet, you know, it has enough setback, just enough from the property lines and from the buildings to fit in back there. A little bit shoehorned, but it works. And in this case, you know, you're close to the boundary and close to the property line and close to the driveway. So this one is just kind of left to empty and flow, you know, down. And that will be the case. There will be, you know, you can't always do it 100%. But let's look at another example. And these are, and again, we'll talk about this when we get into site challenges. Just by simply, remember, here's where the downspouts are. But if the gutters were rehung in this instance, so that this downspout was back here, where it does have room, as opposed to up here, and this downspout was moved up here to this corner, now you could have both of them coming into this rain garden, which could be a little more sufficient or bigger sized. And this stays the same size, but it picks up, you know, this downspout in the back. And that's another solution. And also, alternatively, you can see they've decided on a different treatment here where, you know, maybe you don't want the full cost of a buried pipe connecting these two. So they just have a short little distance to get to this rain garden that's just collecting from the 360-foot portion of roof. And this is a little tiny, you know, rain garden. Oops, sorry, I didn't do that. I'm jumpy. And you know, it's sufficiently away from the house. And as I said, it's not a steep slope. It's almost flat. So that is probably very safe as well. So I hope that, I know it's numbers and math and such, and some people it's easy to glaze over, but I hope it's clear. And as I say, you have the packet to refer to as well. Okay, we're going to take a break. I see that it is 11. So should we come back in, say, six or 7 minutes? I'll meet you back at 10:18, we'll say. Okay, thanks.
People were buying physical copies of those games, and a huge number of those were being purchased in physical stores. So a game developer like Tim Sweeney was going to have to pay for packaging and shipping, and then would have to give a huge cut of sales to retail stores. Game developers would end up keeping less than half of every dollar that a customer paid for their game sometimes. But then, in 2008, Steve Jobs walked out onto a stage.
Welcome.
And he announced the App Store. And he
the trillion-dollar hand that is feeding you?
But Tim Sweeney, Epic Games, wasn't dependent on Apple. Most people do not play Fortnite on their phones. They play on their computers or on PlayStation or Xbox.
Well, Epic is fighting this battle because we're in some regards uniquely positioned to do it. If it were truly a David versus Goliath tale with a 10-person developer shop taking on Apple, they'd just be crushed. I'm sorry, it's not a plausible outcome.
In other words, Epic Games was big enough to fight. And so at 2 a.m. on a Thursday last month, Tim Sweeney stopped trying to negotiate with Apple. He wrote an email essentially saying, we don't care about the rules anymore, and we're going to break them.
Hi,
If you
everybody.
punish me, expect
Welcome
more.
back.
And along with that email,
So let's talk a little bit about what actually happens when you start to build a rain garden, and the construction of a rain garden. Now that we've figured out how many rain gardens we can fit on our properties, how big they need to be, where they need to be located, now we need to figure out how to build one. So you're going to need some tools and ways to mark out your space. But let's first talk about when is a good time to build it. There's two things that we're really talking about when we're thinking about the best time. One is how easy is it to dig? And the next thing is when is a good time for plants to get established in our rain gardens? And of course, alongside all of this is, when is it raining and we don't want the garden filling up with water while we're trying to build it? So that being said, fall is the best time of year once the ground has softened up a little bit. We have a little break in the rain. Fall is the best time really to get your plants established. Spring right now would be the next best time to build your rain garden. Again, you have to kind of play around with the timing of the rains and make sure that you don't hook up your downspout to your rain garden until you're done building it. In the summertime, when a lot of us are thinking about getting outside and doing projects, that's the most difficult time to build your rain garden. The soil has dried out and it's hard as a rock and you need picks to get in there. It's a lot more resource intensive to establish plants. You need to be watering them every day. And then winter or the super rainy season is not recommended because you don't really want to be working soils while they're fully saturated. Laura mentioned the utility notification center, 811, the simple number to call before you dig. It's the law. And you do not want to be running into a gas line that might not be as deep as you expected. So they're going to come out and mark where the utilities are. They're going to mark it in the right of way, and then you need to figure out where that utility runs into your house and kind of draw a line to that point to determine where those lines are locaed.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
One of the participants says she can't hear you. I don't know if that's for, I mean, I'm assuming everyone else can hear. If you want to respond in the questions.
Yeah, can you hear me, Laura?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So let me just raise my volume, if that matters. Or I'll just come a little closer to the computer. Try that. Or I'll just speak more loudly. Okay. So we're going to look here at a case study of a rain garden that was done with a group of attendees at a church in Southeast Portland, where this was a collaboration with the rain garden class and the city of Portland. So the city of Portland had done all of the calculations and determined the size and did the perk test and all of those things, which we also did as a class, but they had this all prepared for us when we showed up. So what we're looking at here is a very, very large roof area that is collecting a lot of water. So this is quite a huge rain garden area. As I recall, this was about 25 feet long and, 8 or 10, maybe 12 feet wide. What we're looking at here is the shaded in portion is the bottom of the rain garden, where most of that water is going to be absorbed. And then this area is the sloping sides of the rain garden. And then we're going to take all of the excavated soil and put it out here, which is going to be the berm of the rain garden. And it's going to hold all of that water in. Down at this bottom area, what's indicated is this is where the overflow is going to go, away from the building. And this is the downspout. So there's a downspout, it runs along this post and just is disconnected right here at the base. They have removed all the lawn for us. So all that lawn they've taken and turned upside down and put along the edge over here, because you can see this starts to slope down along the side, and they actually, their slope was directed towards the building. So they had water issues in the basement, kind of a daylight basement of this church. So by piling up the soil, the sod, they were able to fix that grade and make the water flow away from the building. So that was two solutions in one. And then the other thing that was just a little point of concern that we'll come back to later, but I just want to point it out now, is that you can also see in the distance all of this parking lot is sloped towards the building, all of its sheeting towards the building onto this patio. And this post is also dropping all of the rainwater right into this little corner. This post supports the entire roof of this whole building. A lot of pressure on this one point, which is now saturated with water. Very, very deep eaves here. So we'll talk about the solution that we, the whole time that we were building this, I was thinking, we need to get this water away from this post. So there is a upside down spray paint that you can use. Some is water soluble, and you can spray on the ground what you need, the shape, or you can use a rope or a hose to determine the shape of your rain garden before you start to excavate. Best to be digging by hand as opposed to with machinery. And you can kind of see a little bit of the line. So we just started working from the slope line, towards the center of the rain garden, trying to step in the rain garden as little as possible. So compaction is the enemy. You want to stay out of the rain garden as much as possible. You can see that we're just kind of standing on a little island that's left as we start to excavate, and all that soil is kind of put towards the edges. That's one of the biggest problems, I think, in constructing a rain garden at home is you're generating a lot of soil, a lot of excess soil. And so it kind of makes sense just to make a berm around it. Otherwise, you need to haul all of that soil off site unless you have some other place on your site to put it. This is a photograph of the project that is at East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, where they were doing a lot of work on site, and there was machinery on site. So they did use machinery for the excavation of these fairly small rain gardens that would have been easy enough to dig by hand. But as I said, the machinery was already on site. So you can see the machine is outside of the rain garden area. They are now excavating the base of the rain garden. This will be the slope of the rain garden. And now just a little bit of thoughts about building up the berm. As I said, we're throwing the soil off to the sides, and it's best to compact it as you go. But I do want to take an opportunity while we have this slide up to point out this little wiggly thing on the side of the rain garden. And this happens to be a root that was excavated. Off to the bottom left, where out of the photograph, you can't see it. There's a very, very big, huge deodar cedar, where we thought we might be encountering some roots of that tree. This is the only root that we found. And because we excavated carefully. Once we found the root, we were careful to look for roots as we excavated. We ended up covering this over and excavating out a little bit of extra on this side to accommodate. So we kept that root intact and covered. What we're looking for, you could notice this shape of the rain garden and the berms. It's a low bowl shape. It's very gentle slope. It's a 3-to-1 slope. So that means that for every foot of height of the berm, you have 3 feet of width from the high point to the low point. So that makes a total of 6 feet wide by 1 foot high. That's a lot of space. And usually your berms will not be 1 foot high, but it's easier to, for the example, to just show you what 1 foot would be like. But it's not, but it's really from the center to the outside edge is 3 feet. So, and you're going to compact the berm as you go in what they call lifts. So you put down some soil, you walk on it, put down some soil and you walk on it. Make sure that it's fully compacted. The reason that this is important is that particularly if you have a property with a little bit of slope, you're going to need to be barricading the very bottom of the rain garden so the water doesn't overflow down the hill. So you're going to need to build up a little berm just to hold the water in place. And that berm is going to need to be compacted so the water pressure doesn't blow out all of that soil. So here we are, one of the attendees compacting the berm as we go. Now, for the most part, when you have any kind of a slope at all, and as Laura pointed out, even with a 2% slope, that's a little bit of slope, you'll need to make a little berm on the downhill side just to keep that water filling at a natural level and before it overflows. But if you have a property that is sloping a little bit towards the house or is really perfectly flat, you're going to want to make sure that that overflow water is flowing away from the house. So you might put your berm on the house side of the rain garden with your pipe coming through so that you overflow to the surrounding area, not towards the house. And remember that the inlet is always higher than the outlet. So you want this water to flow in and then flow out at a lower point. If the outlet is higher, of course, it's going to flow back towards the house. And this is just a little mistake that has happened on projects before when the contractor wasn't conscientious enough about the grades. And sometimes the connection to the pipe at the house was right at the base. And the overflow turned out to be higher than where the water was entering the pipe at the downspout. And so what ended up happening is that the water backed up in the pipe and then overflowed right at the foundation of the house and caused flooding in their basement. That's a project that happened recently. The solution was to make the pipe higher at the house. Grading is important. You want the bottom of your rain garden to be relatively flat. In this case, we tried to grade the bottom of the rain garden a little bit away so that it was deeper, farther away from the inlet. If you picture water coming in every day with a little bit of rain, this is always the wettest spot of the rain garden, right where the inlet is. And then sometimes the water never even makes it to the back end. So with a very long rain garden like this, we graded it away a little bit. You can see because of the color of the soil that compost has been added onto the berm and mixed into the bottom, and now we're just kind of leveling it off. Which brings us to making sure that the bottom of the rain garden is level. If you're working on a slope and you're excavating, you don't want to do something like this because the water will only fill up this little portion. I mean, you can do something like this, but realize that your rain garden is only this big. And you kind of want to maximize the amount of water that is soaking into the ground by giving it a nice level area to soak in. Looking again at a cross section of the rain garden, we're looking for a maximum ponding depth of 12 inches, usually 6 inches to 12 inches of ponding depth. That is definitely true when your inlet or your downspout water is coming in from the surface of the ground. Sometimes we're coming in with an underground pipe, and then you still want your ponding depth to be 6 to 12 inches below that pipe. And then of course your overflow needs to be a little lower than your inlet. So all little tricky grade things. This is why that line level is super important. Using your tools is really crucial to understanding the way that water will flow. Just the tiniest little bit of a low spot will determine where that water will move. Soil amendment is really done mostly for the plants. We've already done our percolation tests, so we know how well our soil percolates or soaks in, how quickly the water will soak into the ground, but we're adding a little bit of soil amendment to improve the growth of the plants. You're going to mix that into the soil. Here's that daylight basement. Here's the little downspout, the end of the downspout. Here's the daylight basement, and you can see that they added soil to slope away from those big windows. All right, so when you're using amendments, what do we mean when we say amend the soil? Well, you're basically going to be you're looking for something compost type product. And if you're looking at a bagged product, it'll be something that would be called compost or planting mix. Planting mix is generally for planting in the ground, whereas potting soil is used for container gardening. There's a lot of bagged product out there, so it helps to know the terminology. Compost you can get in bulk, which is the most efficient and cost-efficient way to get your compost. You'll mix that in with your native soil to 1 part compost to 2 parts native soil is kind of the recommended blend. Sand, contrary to what you might think, is not recommended. And that is because in order to really amend your soil with sand, you need to add so much sand that you would never mix that much in. So it's too fine a particle to really mix into clay, and it actually will end up making your soil harder and more like concrete if you just mix some sand in. So don't do that. If you do want to open up your soils, we often use a 1/4 clean or 1/4 10 gravel, which means that it's crushed stone that is 1/4 of an inch and no finer. Finer elements will be too much like sand, and we just determined that that will make your soil denser and harder. So, but you can open up your soils with a coarse, clean gravel that you would mix into the soil. And what we often do for soil amendments in clay soils is 1/2 and 1/2 compost and gravel. And that works pretty well to open up a pretty heavy clay soil. It's not going to turn your poorly draining soil into well-draining soil, but it will improve things a little bit and help to support the plants and let them establish good roots. And the good, strong roots are what's going to really improve the drainage over time. All right, now we're going to look at the piping. We're first going to look at the underground pipe approach to getting water from the downspout to the rain garden. Flexible pipe, which is often what is connected to your downspout to run it 10 feet away from the house, is not recommended for underground piping. What we're looking at here is a coil of drain pipe, and it's got little slits in it for drainage. This is not what we want to use for our downspout underground. We want to be using a crush-proof pipe, which is an ABS pipe, a type of hard, very hard plastic that's more durable. 3-inch or 4-inch ABS pipe, depending on the dimension of your downspout. Generally 3 inches fine. But there are some oversized downspouts that might require something larger. Then it's important to think about how you connect your downspout to the pipe. And what we're looking at here is something that is a mistake that we commonly see, because the downspout is, oh, it's just a little bit bigger than the pipe, so let's just crush the downspout a little bit to make it fit into that pipe. That's not what we want to do. Again, there are fittings that are for this particular purpose. There's a plastic fitting that has a square to a round end. The square end will go over your pipe, and then the round end will go over the underground pipe. And in this case, we've even added a little bit of clean out in there. Clean outs are handy when you have an underground pipe in case things clog up from leaves in your gutter or other debris. You can run a little snake in there and clear out the pipe so it doesn't back up and come up over your downspout. This is another example of, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a white flexible pipe. It does have a square to a round end. However, this is not a good connection because it might leak, and it is flexible, so it can pop out and make a big belly. So you want a nice hard pipe that's going to run all the way into the ground. And then other types of fittings that you might need to get your pipe, to direct your pipe where you want it to go, would be elbows and keys. There are elbows at different 90-degree angles, 45-degree angles, depending on where you want your, if you're going to join up one downspout to another, you might use a key. And then you're going to connect those pipes. In this case, we're going, here's the front yard. We're taking this downspout. We're going towards the backyard to connect up with our rain garden. An elbow and a T. In this case, here's the front of the house. We're connecting the back of the house is connecting up with the front. Notice the flow of water from the back towards the front. And then this water is flowing out towards the street. Using your line level, really with a long pipe like this, it's better to use a longer wood level because you're dealing with a longer distance. But if you had to, a line level will work. You want to make sure that your pipe is always going downhill, so water will flow through the pipe and not back up in the pipe. It's recommended a minimum of a 1% slope or a 1-inch drop for every 10 feet of distance. And we usually choose to go a little bit deeper than that because 1% is barely enough to keep water moving. One of the reasons for that too is that just in the construction, the backfilling of the pipe, things move a little bit. You might set it up perfectly, but by the time you backfill it, there's a little bit of movement. If you're only dealing with 1%, you might lose that 1% by the time it's all backfilled and finished. But this is the way that the line level should be used. You have your stakes and lines set up during construction, and you're measuring the distance as you go along, that make sure that your pipe is getting deeper as you go. There's a little wider look, so you can see that the pipe is much closer to the line over here than it is as we get closer to the front of the house. And there's a fun little marble test that you can use, especially if you're building a rain garden with your kids. The 1% slope with the marble test, you roll your marble through the pipe. And if you have a 1% slope, the marble will come out through the other end. If the marble moves through the pipe, water will move through the pipe. Sometimes when you have a long length of pipe, the marble will get caught in the little joint between the two pipes. So that's when you might want to make it a little bit stronger angle than the 1%. There is special glues that are used for these pipes. You run a little, it's got an applicator on it. The glue has an applicator on it, so you run it along both sides, and then you put it together. It hardens up pretty quickly. But again, you see that you have to take that pipe out of position in order to, you set it up, you take it out of position, and then you put the glues on, then you put it back together. Did I? Yeah, okay. And note that because we're always moving the pipe downhill, the farther away you get from the house, the deeper the pipe is going to be. Pretty close to the house, if you have no basement or if you're just 10 feet away, it's going to be, it's only going to be, if it's 1 inch and 10 feet, it's just going to be an inch further down into the soil. In a deeper run, moving it all the way to the front of the house, you might gain substantial or lose substantial elevation. So you're coming in quite low and you still need your 6 to 12 inches of area for the water to pool. Using decorative elements and creative ways to move water through the garden and highlight the movement of water is always fun. This was a little project that we did in Southeast Portland, a downspout with a little, she had an existing concrete splash block that we used and put some river rock in it. There's a little bit of a liner here. We have a little shrub in an area. Here's another downspout that's coming through the patio. The water's coming through the patio with in a lined channel. A little plant here, and then really the water is flowing underneath this bridge, and the rain garden is on the other side of the bridge. So this is really just a planted dry stream or a wet stream. So when you are running your water over the surface of the ground and you're not putting it in a pipe, you need to put some sort of a impervious liner so that the water isn't soaking into the ground until you're 10 feet away from the house or wherever the spot your rain garden is going to be built. It helps to have some sort of underlayment of material that will protect from rocks or anything that might be sharp underneath that will maybe pop through the liner. And here we're seeing the layout for a dry creek bed that is lined against, again, the water, you can see it flowing onto the liner, not slipping into the ground. And here's where the rain garden's going to be. So you dig your little trench and you make sure that your liner is layered so that the bottom is behind and the top piece comes over the top, so the water flows and doesn't back up towards the house. And after you do that, then you're going to add some decorative elements like your river rock or boulders. And if you're doing this next to lawn area, you might want to edge the lawn to keep the lawn from encroaching into that area. And here is the finished dry creek bed, which is maybe not the most naturalistic looking creek bed in the world, but it is doing its job. But I think this is a little bit funny, right? This is the actual downspout extension, and it's passing right over a walkway. That seems like a recipe for trouble. So perhaps in this application, nobody really uses this walkway. It's the only thing I can think of. And the other thing is that this is really difficult to maintain grass right up to the rocks. Constantly, the grass is going to try to encroach into here, and you're constantly edging this edge. I think it would have been, certainly right here would be a real opportunity to remove all of this grass and plant it with plants, and even maybe make a little, pull the grass back a little bit so that there's some room to have some plantings before the grass meets the rocks. Just my thoughts on future maintenance. And this is something that we also always do when we're installing, when we're establishing a rain garden, is to put leaf guards on the downspouts. This is a little element that a little item you can buy. So the downspout is cut, you put the leaf guard in. When the leaves and debris that are inevitably on the roof come through the pipe, they get caught up in this mesh, and the water works. Is the only thing that's left that comes through the pipe. You get in there and clean that out a couple of times a year, especially when the rains start and all the first flush of debris comes through. This way, your pipe isn't going to be quite as likely to get clogged. So you don't need that clean out and the snake for later on. But if you are going to have a clean out, you want to have an area that's exposed, an area of the pipe that is sticking out so you can access it, and then you would have a little screw-on tap to close it off so debris doesn't get inside there. You open it up when you need to clean it out, stick a snake in there to route out the debris. And a beautiful clean out in a landscape. Now, you can make this a little bit more decorative. You do have to be able to access it. And you just don't want to hide it so you can never find it again. We're looking at a relatively flat lot here. There's two downspout pipes coming. One is coming from this front downspout, and one is coming from the back downspout, both flowing into this rain garden in the front, relatively flat. So we need to make sure that the outflow is a little bit lower than the inflow, which I guess is happening here. Might be just that you can see a little bit of elevation change in this sloping driveway. So it's just enough to convince the water to move out this way instead of towards the house. If you are if you're not building a berm, or you're planning to move that soil someplace else and keep the lawn around it, make sure that you use tarps to put the soil on, or else you'll kill the lawn. If you're trying to kill the lawn, then that's a good way to do it. And again, this little funny area that's left by the entryway, this little wedge of sod, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as a visually or practically to have to mow this little tiny piece. So this is a nice opportunity to increase the area of your native plants in the garden. And then the final step is positioning and then planting the plants. What we're looking at here is sluice sedge, which is a fast-growing, spreading, tall grass that is evergreen and will populate the bottom of the rain garden. Here's that big tree that I was talking about earlier, where we found a little root right around here. So you can see that the canopy of the tree is this is just right around the drip line, and there's still some roots there. Planting the plants, again, you'll have to get into the rain garden for this part. You're basically trying to stay out as much as possible. And also realize that this is something that people forget to take into consideration, is that the pots of soil, the gallon pots that you'll be planting, you're going to just be displacing a certain amount of soil just by digging the holes. So you might want to over excavate your hole a little bit deeper so that the soil that comes out of the hole can be spread along the base and still not make your final elevation of the rain garden too high. Otherwise, you might need to take that soil out and put it elsewhere, whether it be on the berm or on a tarp outside of the area. After planting, you always want to mulch, whether you're doing rain garden or any other planting in your yard. You want to add at least 2 inches of fine or shredded mulch to make sure that your plants are free from weed encroachment and also will stay cooler and moister in the summertime. What you don't want to use is like a chunkier bark nugget type of a mulch. And the reason for that, this is in your rain garden in particular, the reason for that is that these light pieces of bark tend to float. And so there's nothing more frustrating than kind of getting your pretty rain garden together. In the first rain, it's just full of like floating bark chips at the top. So use something fine or shredded or just a broken, like a compost, more of a composted bark. And here is one of the finished rain gardens. Pretty much the interior of the rain garden is planted here, and we don't have a lot of plants on the berm, but pretty much anything, you know, it's the wetland plants that need to be in the rain garden, and the drier plants can be on the berm. And then the other rain garden example that we were looking at with the church, here is the solution that we came up with. As I said, these are very deep eaves, so we're about 3 feet wide. And so we added a rain chain to a concrete low bowl that we tipped towards the rain garden. So the water comes down the chain, flows into the rain garden, and then here's the overflow into the surrounding areas. And in this case, we have not only planted the swale of the bowl of the rain garden, but we also have planted trees and shrubs and ground covers on the berm as well. And then this is that same rain garden 3 years later from the other direction. Here is the rain chain that's connected, those deep eaves, the rain chain, the bowl. And you can see how quickly, here's that big tree, how quickly these plants have grown. And this is all that sluice sedge at the very bottom, which gets quite tall, up to 3 feet tall, and is nice and evergreen, so that when a lot of the native plants go dormant and lose their leaves in the wintertime, except for the Oregon grapes, it still looks interesting and nice. And another newly installed rain garden, this one also in Southeast, was a project of mine as well. We built this retaining wall to kind of level the area for the rain garden. And this wall was built with a lot of drainage behind it, a brand new construction. So we are a little bit closer. This is probably 6 feet away. We felt confident that all of this drainage was also staying on site. We have a little kind of lower spot where all that drainage is going. Here's the downspout extension, which is flowing over a boulder through a little dry stream and into the rain garden. And this was, you know, the first rain after the installation, the use of boulders to kind of make things a little bit more interesting. And as time goes by, we've just been using less and less river rock in the bottom because it's a resource that our rivers need, frankly. And this has a little stepping stone path nearby. Make sure that you don't fall into the rain garden when you're walking on your path. And then 2 years later, again, you hardly notice that these are sunken depressions once they get filled up with plants. So, but it is kind of a nice feature, and it changes over the years. So we're going to get into the plant portion, and I'm going to turn this over to Laura in just a minute. But just to review, we have these rain garden planting zones in the rain garden where the plants that can tolerate the wettest conditions will be at the bottom because they're going to be underwater part of the year. On the slope, the plants will just just their toes will be in the water, and sometimes they'll be underwater, but it's going to drain pretty quickly. And then the top or the berm are going to be plants that really never get wet feet. There, it's much drier up there, and pretty much you can plant any plant up there. So looking at the cross section again, the very bottom where it's flat is where our wetland plants that can grow underwater will go, and then the sloping sides will be for less and less water requirement plants. And then in plan view, the bottom of the rain garden and the slope and the top. And in this example, you know, ideally you want the bottom to be as big as you can make it, because that's where all the water is going to soak into the ground. But sometimes, you know, it just works out this way for one reason or another. And then the plants themselves, they do serve a function in the rain garden, and we've seen this time and time again, where the drainage does improve over time once plants are planted. And the reason for that is that as plants get established and their roots go deeper and deeper into the soil, some of those roots will die and some new roots will grow. And those old roots start to create channels for water to get deeper into the soil. That's one way that the plant functions. And then the plants themselves drink up water through their roots and release them, you know, evapotranspiration into the atmosphere. The plants themselves help to reduce soil erosion. So if you make your sides of your rain garden too steep, you're going to get erosion into the bottom of the rain garden. That's why that 3-to-1 gentle slope is important. Plants, as well as the soil, both help to break down any pollutants that are in the water, from zinc that might be from your roof if you're managing moss up there, or any other surrounding pollutants. Sometimes plants take up these pollutants and hold them in their plant tissue, and sometimes they just filter the pollutants. And of course, the plants provide habitat and food for wildlife. So I'm going to shift over, and we'll have Laura talk about some rain garden plants, plants to include and plants to avoid in the rain garden. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Laura, to share your screen.
Okay, I think we've got it.
Okay.
All right. Actually, first off, I want to mention, if you haven't already noticed, there are 2 shorter workshops, one that focuses on native plants, and the other one, another one that focuses on invasives and weeds. So, so I'm just going to introduce these plants and not, you know, spend a lot of time talking about each one in the interest of keeping us moving along. And most of the ones that we have featured here are, so many of our natives really are, you know, we want them because they're very drought tolerant. But the plants that we are showing you here are ones that in nature you would see in wetlands or on stream side that, you know, really appreciate the moisture. Okay, so we have, this is it's called a grass, but it's really not. It's almost more like a little bulb or rhizome type perennial. And it's called blue-eyed grass, Cicericium idahoense. There is a yellow-eyed grass too. So obviously these aren't such a big structural, but in terms of color and detail, it's a really nice plant for that bottom layer and ground cover portion of your rain garden. And always with each of these, you can see where, you know, suggestions, whether it's bottom, sides, or top of rain garden, and how they do, you know. So this one, generally speaking, the ones that you really want flowering are going to appreciate at least, you know, part sun, if not full. camas is one of our much beloved native plants. It's a bulb. It blooms, I think, around Mother's Day. There is a Camassia preserve down in West Lynn if you want to see a photo like the one that you see here. It's really pretty special. So they tend to be in perched wetlands and wet meadows. They are really happy with a full sun or a part sun situation. So obviously, you know, if you put this in your garden, it's like daffodils. You get to enjoy it in the spring for a little while. Monkey flower is a perennial, Mimulus guttatus. And I find that these, boy, once they take hold, they're pretty prolific and they look pretty lush. So that too would be okay on the bottom, or I would say probably also sides myself. And it's a great pollinator perennial as well. Okay, so this is daggerleaf rush, Juncus ensifolia. We actually have many types of rushes and many types of sedges, which you'll also be seeing here. And these are what we call the workhorses in the rain garden. It's what we put in the bottom. You saw it in those couple of examples we showed you. And because our wetlands are, I mean, they're inundated and filled with water for quite, you know, long stretches through our winters. So they do the best in a wet situation. There are types of grasses. And a feature of grasses, you have seed heads on top that generally kind of last there into the late fall and winter. So it's, you know, it has that added value of some food for the birds too. So here's an example of a sedge, and you can see how they're both sort of clumping in form. And it looks like there's a rush behind this sedge here. One of the mnemonics we use when we're teaching is rushes are round and sedges have edges, if you want to remember what each is. And again, you see the seed heads on the top of this sedge, which is, they're attractive and a food source as well. And both of these plants generally tend to spread on their own. And so as you're placing, you know, deciding how many to put in your rain garden, just know that they'll sort of fill in and thicken over time on the bottom. So don't plant them too solid to begin with. We have also another grass called it's tufted hair grass, or Dischampsia cespitosa. And they all seem to have the full same requirements of appreciating the full sun, indoor part shade, and great for the bottom of the rain garden. So we do have some larger shrubs that actually do well in wet, and I've seen these growing out in our natural wetlands. This is a Douglas spirea, and it can tend to be almost 6 feet high. I've also seen them used in a lot of situations. I think of the St. John's treatment plant, where they have huge plantings of this. And, you know, it prunes very well if you want to keep it down to a certain size as well. It takes to that. And of course, those anything that is a flower cluster made up of lots of little tiny flowers is especially great pollinator flower. So you can see a little native bee on there. And this would be happy on the sides. It says bottom, but it would also be happy on the sides of the rain garden, getting some wet. And likewise, Pacific 9-bark. It's a shrub that can get, 8-10 feet high. We see it, I find it along the stream banks. They're really great for holding, with their roots for holding the banks in place and preventing erosion. So again, if you have other areas of your property that are a little moister or down, down slope, you can be looking at these shrubs that appreciate some moisture for planting there as well. This is the rhodosier dogwood, also sometimes called just red twig dogwood for obvious reasons. Cornus sericea. And it, again, happiest with full sun or part shade. It will grow on the bottom. It will happily with a lot of moisture, but also the sides. I've seen people even put these in more drought areas. They seem to be a pretty resilient plant, but their preference would be some moisture. And again, this is another one that could grow really large, but it also is happy with pruning, and in fact, the selective kind of cutting out. It's the young branches that get that bright crimson, and as they get old and thick and woody, you know, they lose that luster. So you can selectively thin out the old wood to sort of keep the plant, the shrub, in a rejuvenated condition and form. So it's just nice to know that you can also control size if you want to, because they can get, I've seen these out in natural areas get up to 15 feet high at least. Oh, I'm sorry. One thing I want to say about this, they're almost like a willow in that you can cut these stems and stick them in the ground and the stem will root. So you can actually happily, as you're pruning, propagate from your mother shrub of red twig dogwood. Salmonberry is a tasty berry. Hopefully you're all familiar with it, Rubus spectabilis. Where I've seen these is they definitely appreciate more wet than, say, the native thimbleberry. And also interestingly, they do better in shade and part shade. So, you know, that's, you may have an area of your garden where you want to place your rain garden that is shady. So, you know, it's important to look at these plants for their tolerance of sun and shade. And I think in here in our booklet, we do have sort of a handy palette of suggested plants for each condition of sunny and shady. These are pretty tasty berries, and it's just distinctive, of course, from all the other berry plants in that their flower is this magenta pink. So we have several native roses, but as the name implies here, swamp rose really loves the moisture. And it's Rosa pisocarpa. That flower is probably only about 1 inch across, and these little rose hips are probably a little larger than pea size. So it's a very sort of fine textured rose, I would say. And the thing to know about roses, though, is they, if any of you grow raspberries, you know how they have underground runners and new little stalks will pop up here and there. So roses grow similarly. You know, they almost want to become like a rose thicket, which is great sheltering for wildlife, along with the flowers for pollinators and berries for birds. But keep that in mind. It's not like a singular. It won't stay a singular plant. So put it somewhere where it can kind of expand that way. So as you may have noticed, we're kind of going up in scale and size. So this is choke cherry. It's thought of as a shrub, but it can get, you know, it's probably between 10 and 20 feet. I think, or is this the one that gets larger? I'm trying to think now.
This can get pretty big, like a small tree.
Bitter cherry. There's bitter cherry and choke cherry.
Right.
So yes, happy in wet areas, indoor side slope areas is what it would prefer. And you can see how prolific it is, and all of these are great wildlife plants with the berries. Okay, so you've seen in some of the examples we've shown before with rock being used or logs or other, you know, art. And And I guess it's just sort of a general statement to say, you know, it's our rainfall is what signifies the Northwest, and there's ways to celebrate water and make it a feature with our little, you know, stream channels that we create, or in this case, the picture on the right is from a New Seasons, where rather than take the downspout down to the ground, they turned it into a fountain feature there, and a little splash fountain. I've seen an incredible example of this approach done at I think it's called Crest School down by Graham Oaks, which is in Wilsonville area, and the whole school has these, I don't know if you'd call them, I don't know what the architectural term is, but it's just like on a rainfall, you have waterfalls all around the school flowing off the roof, which is quite a sight to see. So personalized.
I think they're scuppers.
Scuppers, is that the term?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. So we had a brochure of this. I hope it's one of the materials online here, because it's kind of hard to read all these little plants. But, you know, if you want the help, this is a handy go-to suggested plant list for both sunny and shady garden situation. Since there's so much interest in growing food these days, we've often got this question in our classes, and we generally discourage trying to, you know, blend your food growing with your rain garden. And the main reason is, you know, that garden has, you know, in addition to getting water into the, you know, back into the ground, it's also doing this, you know, water quality job of breaking down various pollutants. So no, you know, we show blueberries because that's a shrub, and the berries are up in the bushes, and something like that could work, you know, on the around the sides of the garden. But definitely do not try to be growing food inside. Of course, this sort of drives home the point. These are the rain gardens that are really doing the water quality work, taking it all off the streets, which routinely is, you know, has petroleum products, etc. So not a place for food. People also ask about maintenance, and it's not that different than, you know, maintaining the rest of your yard. Where, you know, natives are supposed to be drought tolerant. Even our wetlands, you know, dry out in the summertime. So in addition, those, you know, those plants that are okay with being inundated are also okay with going through a dry spell. That being said, when you're just planting new young plants and the roots are only as deep as the pot that you got them in, you really do want to help them through that first summer or two, and that will help them establish deeper roots that are going to serve them well in the long run through our drought periods. No need for fertilizers or garden chemicals. Just is no need, and the mulch is important to prevent weeds. So you don't have to have that maintenance or be tempted to use chemicals. And again, stressing the idea of keeping mulch as a sort of a liner of your rain garden. And then, you know, there are opportunities to prune and keep things shaped and as you wish. Hopefully you don't have too much weeding. And some of our, you know, under trees, you may have a lot of leaf fall inside that you'd want to be raking out of the garden, you know, once a season. But it should be nothing too major.
Can I add a little tidbit about maintenance that we've been running into with some older rain gardens once they've been established, is that sometimes when we and as Laura said, you know, the workhorses of the rain gardens are the rushes and sedges, and they do quite a bit of spreading. Sometimes with those, when they start to really fill in the rain garden, sometimes those grasses will actually keep the water from flowing into the rain garden, and they'll block the water and cause them to flow outside of the rain garden before they fill the rain garden. So that's kind of important to check, I think, as we head into the winter, to make sure that, or even as your rain garden is filling with water, to check on it now and then.
Like our
to make-
gutters.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of dead debris, which Laura mentioned you should clear out, but also the living plants, to make sure that there's a pathway for the water to get into the rain garden. I think there's 2 or 3 examples that have come up this year, so just wanted to mention that as well.
Okay. And again, we're gonna just show you a few invasives to be on the lookout for in the city. There's just any vacant lot would be a great education to show you every invasive that tends to take hold. And, we just, because water flows, invasives that are traveling with water, it can be really problematic. So let's just remind you of a few things to be on the lookout for. Butterfly bush. Of course, I remember 25 years ago, it was touted as a great wildlife shrub, and it's true, bees and butterflies love this. But we have examples of this one just taking over our riverways. And you can see by these, flower clusters and all the tiny little seeds, they're very prolific and they travel with birds. And so there's just no need to have this plant around. There's plenty of native alternatives that are also beautiful. In fact, it's even illegal to grow these in Oregon anymore. But there are cultivars of it that are supposed to be sterile. I remain a little suspicious there. But yeah, here you see it taking over riverways. And of course, what they do is displace all the natives. Yellow flag iris, it's pretty, as are a lot of our invasives. That's why they were brought here and became an invasive. I've seen these take. Vinca is a common name also called periwinkle. And it's a pretty ground cover, but we're starting to see, especially in areas where you might be next to a natural area green space, it will spread into the forest. And we have so many forest ground covers that are lovely that this plant can kind of displace and take over their habitat. So we like to avoid that. Bishop's weed, also called gout weed, is just very aggressive. It's, if you have that in your garden anywhere, it's kind of a bully. It doesn't play nice with anything around it. It takes over and it spreads with underground rhizomes. So, these become sort of maintenance headaches as well. So avoid that. And similarly, this is one that was popular for a while because of the colors in the leaf and the flowers, but it's just found to be too aggressive. And because of all the underground rhizomes, it's hard to get rid of once it's there, because every little piece of root that's left in the ground can start a new plant. So that's right. We should have warned you. So we have a little break, and I'm just going to say 5 minutes. So 11:26, and our last section, which will hopefully be done and out of here before 3, is basically looking at if you've got constraints or challenges that you have to work with to do your rain garden, or you may have determined that you can't do a rain garden. So what else can you do to manage the rainfall that's on your site? So we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
This week with Negin Farsad, Mo Rocca, and Amy Dickinson. And here again is your host, a man who just discovered there's a smaller Peter inside of him, and then there's an even smaller Peter inside of that Peter, and an even smaller Peter inside of that Peter. Peter Sakel.
Thanks, Bill. Right now it's time for the Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me Bluff the Listener game. Call 1-888-WAIT-WAIT to play our game on the air. Hi, you are on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Hi, this is Kara Dunn, and I'm calling from a quiet corner of Morrisville, Vermont, referred to as Mud City.
Mud City? So Morrisville, Vermont, a quiet corner of Morrisville, Vermont. I'm assuming that the rest of Morrisville is happening all the time.
Spring break. It's spring break.
Why is the section of Morrisville, Vermont that you're in called Mud City?
Well, I feel like it might be pretty obvious, but it is a muddy little corner that is predominantly a dairy farm area, so it's just very, very muddy.
Wow.
So the mud is more like poop based, like from cows.
Absolutely, it's nice and super sticky.
All right.
Ooh.
Well, welcome to the show, Kara. You're going to play our game in which you must try to tell truth from fiction. Bill, what is Kara's topic?
Home sweet home, more like home sweeter home.
Since we've all been stuck inside, home decorating and renovation is more popular than ever before. We're basically doing to our homes what we wish we could do to our bodies. Our panelists are going to tell you about 3 new trends in home design. Pick the one who's telling the truth and you'll win our prize. Are you ready to play?
I am super ready.
Super ready. Great. Here we go. Let's start with Mo Rocca.
The coronavirus is no flu, as we've all learned. But a chimney flue, it turns out, has lately become a great way to earn money. Quote, when someone from the Pentagon called and said they wanted to use my chimney as a missile silo, I was surprised, says Vandy Walker of Bronxville, New York. Yes, to cut costs, the military is renting out residential chimney flues to use as missile silos. Quote, we live in a 2-story colonial, so we could only accommodate a short-range cruise. But no warhead for us, thank you very much. We don't need that kind of heat. For this initiative, the military has partnered with Zillow. That's how they found Ann and J.B. Boris of Denver, Colorado, and a home for one of those hard-to-place ICBMs. We have a spacious home, but I really didn't think we could handle anything larger than a tomahawk, says Ann. So when they actually suggested a laser-guided nuclear-tipped AGM Hellfire, well, let's just say I went ballistic. But then J.B. reminded me that we just
Okay. Hello, everybody. Hopefully we're all back. And so this whole section is just to address anything that might come up that's kind of outside of what we talked about. You know, the real world isn't as simple as some of these examples we've shown you. And I want to start out, I'm going to launch this poll. And let's see, it's in progress. So hopefully you can see it. And I just want to hear any other sort of drainage or water issues that you might have on your property. So if you could respond to that, that would be great. Ooh, I'm seeing number of people with standing water or soggy areas, which is a good time of year to notice. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and close it in the interest in keeping us moving here. So, as you can see, oh, we'll maybe have some questions to look at too. So that's good. A lot of people don't have water issues. That's nice. And as you can see, the biggest one is standing water in places, which could be due to several different factors. A lot of it could be water coming onto your site as well, and some erosion if there's slope, obviously. Okay, so hopefully this section will help, but really in situations like this, it really helps to have a professional kind of assessing the site and the particulars on a case-by-case basis in a situation like that. Okay, so let's move forward here. I'm just gonna move my cursor in the right place. So what we mean by challenging soils is maybe you did the percolation test and it was pretty marginal. So, you know, if you have the space, make it a little bigger, as we, you know, the term is over-engineer. Don't design it by the minimum, but be a little more gracious in terms of the area you create to collect the water. And also, you know, in our wintertime, there's no problem with letting that water take 2 days to drain instead of 1 day. So that's a solution. In fact, we have some suggestions for how to, you know, that 10% rule. Like here, you can see the 10% rule of thumb that we suggested. It is if you have really good drainage at like 2 inches an hour. And even though we said the 1/2 inch an hour is perfectly adequate, you know, that percentage that you're using to calculate the area has doubled in that case. So this is kind of an important caveat here to notice. And as always in real life, there's tends to be some barriers or obstacles. And here's a situation clearly in need of a fix. You know, this is not the best entryway. The sidewalk and the steps, and this water is emptying right across there. You can see the wetness and the growth and all. So, you know, there's several ways you could convey this across over to this area. That is perfectly fine. I mean, it could be a surface gravel sort of trench, you know, with a liner under it that we've shown you, or you might, you know, actually want a, you know, a pipe underground that's going to, you know, outlet into the garden this way. So either way works. Here's sort of a homegrown overhead way to move water to a spot that provides more room and space for the rain garden. You're probably not swinging on that swing in the winter and getting splashed on, but it's an ingenious idea. And I can see that they also have wisteria growing on there that covers this swing in the summertime. A little, what shall I say, less homemade and professionally fabricated. I think, well, 24th and Southeast Division, what a beautiful solution to take the water from the roof over the dumpster into a garden, salmon swimming upstream. It's a piece of art and really effective. So as we walk around, I think it happens where you start looking at situations going, they could use a rain garden. And then there's some, it's like questionable. So what do you think about this? What do we notice? Well, they're right. We don't know how much distance there is because photos don't really tell, but it is close to this slope. So, which is a concern. So what could one do here? What we suggest is that this downspout could go off in this direction up here. And it looks like this happens to be a butterfly bush that needs to come out anyway. And so you've got a head start on creating the basin for a rain garden. So that's one way, is redirecting where the downspouts flow, and or maybe even moving where the downspouts come down. As in this case, we see the downspout coming down in this walkway around this side of the porch. So there's no room in here as it is. But one solution that one could do is rehang the gutters so that the water flows that comes down here flows in this direction instead of this direction. In the scheme of things, that's not a huge cost to do that. And it's the difference between having a solution or not. But I just want to say in this case too, that's a pretty narrow little walkway. And there are ways to sort of bore underneath walkways and get a pipe and have, so the flow can come to the other side of the walkway and into the rain garden. So there's a couple solutions for that situation. Or actually a third solution. And here's a case where there's a little walkway and you can see where the underground ABS pipe is coming from the downspout. And I'm sure if it's within that 10-foot setback that we talked about, this could be lined underneath with the vinyl lining so that the water is still conveying, a distance from the house before it goes into the rain garden proper, which is just off screen here on the left. And for little walkways, this itself becomes kind of a nice feature. There's certainly no problem stepping across that. It looks like this is sort of your scenic route path. And back here, you can see that's probably the main sidewalk up to the front porch there. So this might be the connector between driveway and front porch. But it's lovely. This was kind of a fun project that one did. They actually put some stepping stone rock in the rain garden as a way to step through and across it. You'd want to make sure that you're still providing ample volume for the water, that you're not displacing, the amount of water holding that you need. And you can see the young spike rush in there. This is another feature that you could do, and this is, I'd say, well, it's something that you would do on a slope, and it's generally something that people do on kind of in larger pieces of land or larger slopes. I remember working on a property where they were on the backside of Kelly Butte, and the house was at the bottom of the hill, and all of the water from the butte in their property flowed pretty quickly downhill in a rainstorm. And so in a case like this, you are carving, basically you're kind of following the contour line. So the slope is and they're perpendicular to the downhill slope. So as I said, they're kind of parallel with the kind of the contours of the slope. So as the water is coming downhill, these little furrows or ditches are catching it. And of course, the soil that they dug out creates a little mound on the downhill side. And so that's capturing It's slowing down the velocity of that water running downhill, capturing it and holding it enough so it can sink down into the ground. And we did this on this hillside that I spoke of on the back of Kelly Butte. In the berm areas where we planted all our salmonberry and huckleberry that loved the water and also helped hold the soils and the slopes so it didn't erode. So that may be a tactic that works for your property. Of course, the other general suggestion is just you have slopes, plant them up thick and have a variety of types of plants that you're growing there. So you have, you know, the underground cross section shows that you have shallow roots and medium depth roots and deep roots, so that, you know, the trees and larger shrubs would give you some deeper roots, and the other plants around would sort of, basically you want the whole ground profile, you know, to have a nice structure of roots to kind of hold that slope together. The one thing you don't want is, for several reasons, is just a slope like that would all be lawn. It doesn't stop the runoff, and it doesn't hold it really or stop erosion. So this is an easier, less low maintenance solution, as well as solving the water and erosion problem. Now, some sites, just because of where you're located, you could have uphills on 1, 2, or 3 sides that are, you know, draining toward your home. And so this is, in this case, we're not talking about taking water off the roof. We're talking about water issues on your property that are coming to your property from others. And this is kind of an extreme example where they have high ground on all 3 sides of them. And this is the one case where sort of an engineered solution of a trench drain might be needed. So you can see the water's coming down, and this would be it's a perforated drain pipe, which we also call French drain. And so the water can seep into the pipe, not just at the one point, but all along it. So you can see what they've done here is there's positive drainage away from the house for a distance. And then it's almost like a big horseshoe. So all the water that's coming toward them gets picked up, conveyed around, and sent on down the hill. So you may actually, you know, have one side of your home that requires something like this, as I say, which is a more of a engineered solution. But I just visited a client yesterday where they were debating, it's like, do we need this? And looking at the type of grades that we have and the particular things that were going on that were, I think, the way the grades were flowing water to one spot, I felt like they could have an easy solution just by reshaping where the water flows. And we all kind of know this just from playing at the beach and changing things to get water to flow a certain way. And then, you know, getting the plants in there, especially all those ones we showed you, like that really love moisture, and they'll just take up a lot of that ground wetness and through evapotranspiration. And so, you know, soil and plants can be a solution, but, you know, sometimes you need to, you know, have this constructed sort of engineered solution as well. So the water that is coming off your roof, which is often the biggest or largest impervious surface that you have on your property. You know, if you're a gardener, especially, you know, you may want to capture it, what we call rainwater harvesting. And here's an example where they've done that. So you can see the downspouts aren't coming down to the ground, but they're actually being connected to flow into this cistern, which is pretty large. And that's kind of the most important factor is if you want to do rainwater harvesting, you need, because we get like 8 months of rain and then 3-4 months of no rain, for this to be useful, you need a pretty large storage area of those rains to have it kind of pay for it to be of benefit. And this is, this is water for the garden. It's not potable. It's just water that you would use for your landscape, but that tends to be a big water bill for some of us. So if you have the space, consider something like this. And then even these cisterns may have an overflow, or should have. And so in this case, the overflow is connected to flow into a rain garden here. So they're designed in combination. So we've looked at driveways, and often they might be close to the property line, or there's certain, in a lot of cases, they are, the house is above the street in terms of height. And so that means the driveway is flowing toward the street. So, if you really want to be conscientious and capture some of that water too, there is a way you can do it. And it's by using a trench drain, which we see here in these two examples. I think in a lot of our newer homes, these elements are just built in because people have the awareness to do that. And, but, here's an example where you could probably retrofit, and maybe 90% of the driveway, if you had a little trench drain installed right there, it's collecting water from, most of the driveway. And then, of course, this is designed to send it off to the side, and you can see you've got the right grades going on here. So, and enough area to design a little rain garden in there to capture it. So, it's in that site assessment, you can determine if you have an opportunity to do that or not. Of course, we're seeing now with a lot of new driveways, pervious pavers that aren't like the old concrete or asphalt driveways that just let the water absorb through. Another solution. So again, as we walk around and look at, observe, which I always do on my walks, here's the case. So what do you think? Is a rain garden needed? Well, certainly you could just let it be what it is, but we do notice that there's a lot of wetness down at the bottom. Here's this downspout it comes out right here. And so it's flowing directly down, and yes, that's where all this wetness is, which could be avoided. And so, a rain garden in this case might be sort of longer and linear this way to capture that water, so that it isn't going down the hill. And what it has that extra benefit of you're sending it's going down into the groundwater. So on a slope, it gives you a little bit more moisture in the ground longer into the dry season to help those plants thrive. Here's a home in a situation of walking by, I go, gosh, it just seems like an opportunity where you have a shrub bed, and it's like, well, maybe this could just be reshaped to accommodate a rain garden right here. And it looks like there's, a lot of moss in the lawn and wetness. So the downspout and extensions already there. They could be excavating for a rain garden and planting some nice foundation plantings around here. Yet another situation, I think this was in North Portland. It's a huge house and a huge lot, and probably many downspouts. So the question is this, and a pretty flat property, as you can see. So is it needed? Probably not. Is it too, I think the criteria I would use is how mushy is all of the ground around the house, and especially if you have kids or dogs, and that mushiness turns into muddiness and maybe and compaction and hard for lawns to grow. So that might be a motivation to provide a little rain garden in this yard. but there's plenty of yard to absorb the rainfall as it is. But, you know, maybe you can't do a rain garden at all. And so what can you do for that wetness? And is trees have take up an incredible amount of water, you know, from the ground. And they've actually, the city has calculated that. So let's see, what do we say here? We have surface runoff, 3 million gallons in a 1-inch storm is taken up by our trees. This was measured with street trees and parks, I guess is how they figured that. And that came up to 135 million gallons per year. So kind of an impressive figure, and that's keeping it, you know, out of our municipal system, it's like, why tax that when really what we want to do is replenish our groundwater and get it back into the ground on your site. And a lot of the larger shrubs that we suggested too are great for the, you know, their evapotranspiration capability. So where you do need a paved surface, there's these various options. You can see example of some impervious pavers for that walkway, which just, you can see all the little design spaces for water to pass on through. And then we see this coming back, and it was very popular in the 30s, called the Hollywood driveway, is just keeping paths for the wheels and opening it up in between. And it looks like these are graded with like a 1 or 2% so that the water is flowing toward that center island as well. So even with our dense little neighborhoods and need for pavement, there are ways that you can help the rainfall get into the ground. Some people have actually fashioned a little stormwater planter beneath their gutters, especially if it's along a driveway or something. And honestly, what this is doing, you know, it's not getting it into the ground, but it is doing a water quality function. It's kind of breaking down whatever pollutants may be, you know, sloughing from that petroleum-based roof and cleaning it before it then passes into the garden.
Also, these stormwater planters are often used in steep or hilly sites where a rain garden just isn't appropriate. So it's just another way to clean stormwater when you can't, or pre-clean stormwater, I should say.
Yeah, good point. And this is just sort of a cross section of the mechanics of that. You know, I see these like in the Pearl district or commercial districts where it's up against, it's all hard pavement around. And the so important thing to notice, like there's the building, what do we see? A waterproof membrane between the planter, because this is a built-in one as opposed to those troughs, between the rain garden and the building. And then this is, you know, we say everything needs an overflow. So that's what this is. When the water gets up this high, it's going to come down here. And depending on where it's placed, you can either have it just flow out at ground level here, or in really urban settings, there's an underground connection probably back to the municipal, you know, pipe there. So, you know, those are kind of the important pieces to have of any kind of planter situation. So green roofs, you know, it obviously deserves a whole workshop of its own, but I will say that the Bureau of Environmental Services that provides great technical support if you're interested in doing this, and they have a incentive program, or it was like $5 per square foot back if you decided to put a green roof in your property. Of course, the downtown, you know, the buildings with the flat roofs, I forget, we have something like 40 acres of green roofs. And so that's capturing a lot of rain. And they've sort of turned into pollinator habitats as well. Yeah, which I think is pretty cool. And then there's the median or the parking strip, whatever you want to call it, in between our street and our sidewalks. This one happens to be a very generous one, 10, 12 feet. And you may be located where, you know, the grades of the street are such that they could do a curb cut, and so that all the water that's running down the street could flow into like this median area. It becomes another public rain garden. And BES, Bureau of Environmental Services, if you have a situation like that, they're very interested in being contacted. So that something like this could be created. Obviously, you're looking at a newly installed one. I'm guessing that once this is mature, it would just look like a, you know, it'd be pretty, what shall I say, invisible to the casual passerby, not knowing that it's doing this really important job or benefit. And it would just look like a beautiful planting strip. At a much lesser scale and less formal, you may just see an opportunity where you could do something like this yourself, where I know in the older neighborhoods I've seen where these lawns, you know, the thatch is built up over the years and this almost becomes like a dam or a wall. And so here they've removed the lawn and have a ever so slight, but still a depression. And let's say, you know, this is higher, the street's higher here than it is down here. So the water can run down the sidewalk, and sidewalks are always pitched toward the street. So there's a cross, you know, drain on the sidewalk. So water's coming along, and here it has an opportunity to go whoop, and you know, and this area can receive all that water from the sidewalk. So I kind of mentioned, you know, if you do there's a Clean River Rewards program. And if you install a rain garden, up to 100% of the on-site portion, stormwater portion of your water bill, you know, it's a combined bill where you're paying for sewer or stormwater portion, or water, and now I'm a little confused, but anyway.
It's the stormwater portion of your water bill.
Okay.
A percentage of the stormwater portion. Yeah.
That's right. You pay for water and stormwater. So it's just the stormwater, and it applies to the roof only.
I just put a link on the chat for that.
Thank you for that. And again, just check, Gresham has adopted that same incentive program, and maybe others as well. So just check depending on where you live.
Gresham actually has even a better program where they pay for you to install a rain garden.
That's great.
Yeah.
And actually, I believe, you know, this isn't coming from the city, but it's coming from Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District, that they are now creating funds to help people on their private property do projects like this as well.
Right. Yeah, that's great to point that out.
Yeah, it's pretty brand new. And it's not just for rain gardens, it's for naturescaping in general, to get rid of invasives and to create habitat. And so if it applies to you, check that out at their website. And we like to really advertise and I don't know if that's the right word, but share, just like with Backyard Habitat Program, we have a nice little metal sign that you can post up and really be an ambassador and educate your neighbors or passersby as to what's happening. And then they can also find more at our website.
Cool.
So back, you know, there's so much available to you at your website. So if you go to, if you feel like you want to do this, but you need, want a little more guidance or assistance, there's a conservation directory of folks that can help with that. maybe you're a hands-on person and you just want an initial consultation, or maybe you do want someone to help install it. I think that directory is pretty broad in terms of the people that are listed there.
You'll find us there as well.
Yes, good little plug. Of course, we, always appreciate if people can share on their networks as to about these workshops and the messages we're trying to get across. It's a little revolution, 1 yard at a time. And we're trying to shift the post-World War II paradigm that was quite sterile and chemical heavy. And, our city, Portland, was a really richly diverse ecological area. And there's no reason we can't be, yes, we're living here as a city, but we can still bring back a lot of the attributes of our wildlife and healthy soils, and say, using the rainfall that we get and conserving, planting plants that conserve water use in other places. And so, our other workshops, topics cover all of that good stuff. So I think we are done. And thank you, Amy, for jumping in. Do we have any, if you have any questions, we'll take them, but I see we're right at our noon hour. So just thank you for attending, everyone that is here, and we appreciate it. Hope it was helpful. Oh, I guess I should add, or maybe Brandy will jump back on. I believe there's also an evaluation that we appreciate you filling out on these workshops. They're all, what shall I say, open to being dynamically changed and updated. And so if there's anything you want more of or less of, we have an evaluation for you to fill out.
I think that'll just pop up as soon as you leave the webinar.
Yes, it will. Thank you both. Great work this morning. And thank you all for attending. I can go ahead and end our webinar for us now.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Hope to see you at another workshop in the future. I see a question, where can we find the recording when it's over?
That'll be on our website, but I put my email in the chat box, and you are welcome to either contact me or Risa, who you've probably received other emails from. So just reach out to us and we can get that link for you if it's not up yet, because we take a little bit of time to take off the old one and then put the new one on, but we can always get you the link by email. But yeah, the recordings live on the same workshops page. Oh, I actually turned my camera on. The recordings live on the same web page as where you registered for the workshops in general. So feel free to reach out to me and I can get that for you.
Cool.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
That's right.
Bye.
Sun's out.
Sun's out.